So you all should have heard that. You'll have something pop up on your screen so you can accept the recording. Just know that as we move through this presentation, we will be using the chat function today. So we're using it right now. If you'd all like to introduce yourselves with your name, your pronoun, if you're okay with that, as well as your organization, feel free to use the chat right now for that. And use the chat throughout for questions. Our presenter will be able to answer questions throughout or at the end, kind of pretty flexible on that. So we want to make sure that, if you have questions, we will be looking at the chat. My name is Brandy Waliga. I work at Violence Free Colorado. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I will be doing some of the tech support today. So if you see me on screen when I'm on screen, if I'm looking off to the side, I'm checking out the chat. I'm checking out if any of you have questions or issues. Feel free to let me know if there's any tech problems or anything, even things like volume and whatnot. Let us know. That's really helpful. So a couple tech things just for us to be aware of besides the chat. We are also going to be using some polls today. So we're going to have one poll at the beginning of the presentation and one at the end. So just keep that in mind. We also have the option for live transcripts. So if you can have the option down below where it says CC, you can go ahead and turn that on. And if you would like captioning, that will pop up for you. So feel free to turn that on or off, depending upon what your settings are right now. And let's see, in terms of other things, I think we got all of the technical stuff. So I'm excited. We have a whole bunch of folks on this webinar, and we're going to get started with trauma-informed motivational interviewing with survivors. So I'm going to turn it over to Darlene Brace, who's going to lead us through this wonderful presentation today. And thanks so much, Darlene, for being here. And thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me here. It's such an honor to be here and talk to you guys. I've been a member of Violence Free Colorado for the past probably 5 years. I worked for Alternative Horizons in Durango for about 10 years before that. And then I did our college kind of sexual assault response team in college. And so this is just my way to stay involved with you all and the work that you do, because it's near and dear to my heart, because I am a child survivor of domestic violence and sexual molestation, and also an adult survivor of sexual assault. So this is so important to me. And I'm really passionate to talk about motivational interviewing because it's something that I have found really helpful in my practice, just in general. So a little bit of background. I have lots of letters behind my name. Most of them don't really mean anything other than I'm a licensed clinical social worker and an addiction counselor. And I kind of do a lot of non-traditional therapies. So I do AcuDetox for ears and animal assisted therapy. And I'm a registered yoga teacher. So that's what some of those things mean behind my name. But I truly believe in holistic healing, and I truly believe in empowering our survivors. And so that's probably one of the biggest things that I want to bring to you guys is this tool called motivational interviewing that is not therapy. It can be used therapeutically, but I think there's a lot of times people don't understand that motivational interviewing isn't what motivational interviewing is. It's great for advocacy work. It's great for case management work. It's great for work with survivors. It's great for a lot of different things. So that's kind of what the presentation is all about today. So I'm going to let Brandy keep peek on the chat, but feel free to pop up questions in the chat and we can answer them as we go along. But really all we're going to be doing is talking about motivational interviewing and how it can be helpful with survivors and kind of just what that looks like. So, all right. So Brandy, if you wouldn't mind popping up the poll questions, just to get a little gauge on where you guys are at and the information that you guys have. So, yeah.
All right.
I'll let you guys go. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, so sorry. I just wanted to say we should have the motivational interviewing poll. There are 4 questions on here, so feel free to scroll through all of them.
Yeah.
All right, we'll give about 10 more seconds and feel free to let us know where you're at with motivational interviewing. Because I'm guessing we're going to have a big range, which makes sense.
Totally.
All right, it looks like we have more than half of you who have voted. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out and share those. All right, can you see that, Darlene?
I can see it, yeah.
Okay,
so
let me know when you want me to scroll.
Okay, great. So MI, or affectionately known as, or well, MI is the affectionate way to say motivational interviewing. So on a scale of 1 to 10, sorry, I was 0, but 1 to 10, how would you rate your knowledge in MI? So it looks like we've got 3% of you at 9, 5 at 8, some at 8% at 7. But it looks like the majority of you guys kind of fall between like 5, 6, and 7 is what I'm looking at in the scale. And so, yeah, it sounds like you guys have a lot of great knowledge. There's some of you who maybe don't have any experience with it. So yeah, if ask questions away as you kind of go there. My question for you, and it can be rhetorical, is, depending on what you ranked in this question, say you're a 6, what would it take to get you to a 7 or an 8 in your knowledge of MI? Say you're at a 2. What would it take to get to a 3 or a 4 in your knowledge of skills? So it's not something you have to answer, but just something to think about, what would help you increase your knowledge. So go ahead and scroll to the second question if you haven't already. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your curiosity to learn more about MI? And these results look really awesome because it makes sense because you showed up for this webinar today. So 49, which is almost half of you, are very curious at a 10 out of 10. So that's exciting. And the rest of you kind of fall 7, 8, 9, which is really great. So one person's not interested in all, and I thank you for your honesty. So it looks like a lot of you are curious to learn a little bit more or just know a little bit more about MI. So we can go to number 3. How much does your agency currently use motivational interviewing? So, wow, 38% of you said daily, 5% said 3 to 4 times a week, 11% once a week, 14% a couple times a month, and 32% of you don't use it at all. So this is a great opportunity to ask those questions. If you have those questions that you want to ask, maybe even open dialogue with your peers who do use it. How does it work? How do you like it? All of that stuff. Great, so we can go to number 4. On a scale of 1 to 10, I know you're sensing the theme here. If your staff is already trained in MI, how confident is everybody in using MI with survivors? So 10 completely confident, 1 is not confident. It looks like your staff usually fall between about like 5 and 8 if they're trained in it, but it's kind of all over the map if you look at all of the scores. So we can go ahead and close the poll. And that just gives me some information about all of you in a really quick way, but it also gets you thinking. So one of the main things we use in motivational interviewing are these rulers, as we call them. But we ask these like on a scale of 1 to 10 kind of questions because it helps give us pretty concrete feedback from our survivors about what's true for them. So there's a lot of different rulers that you can use. There's this willingness ruler. So like, yeah, on a scale of 0 to 10 or 1 to 10, it doesn't really matter if it's 0 or 1, how willing are you to go meet with the DA tomorrow? Oh, a 5. Okay. So tell me about that, right? Like if they're saying at a 5, there's some ambivalence about going to meet with the DA. Maybe they are scared. Maybe they have daycare problems. Maybe they have barriers, things like that. So that gives you information to open up that conversation. Well, tell me more, about A, B, and C. Same thing with confidence rulers. So on a scale of 0 to 10, how confident are you that you can do this safety plan that we just created together, right? If they score low, then that gives you more information to explore more. Well, what about the safety plan that doesn't lend to your confidence? And maybe you need to tweak things or change things, stuff like that. Readiness ruler, on a scale of 0 to 10, how ready are you to leave the abuser or leave your partner or any of that stuff, right? Because we know our survivors oftentimes don't want to leave. So that can give us information too. So it's a good way to collect information using these little tools. So the books that I totally recommend for motivational interviewing, of course, there's the one on the far left, the Motivational Interviewing, was created by William Miller and Stephen Rolnick, and both are like these very sweet, gentle older men. And it's very clinical, this book, so it's not super user friendly. But what I like is connecting paradigms, because he talks about, Matthew Bennett talks about motivational interviewing from a trauma-informed perspective, which really resonates with me in working with survivors, because it really is trauma-informed in the way that he presents it and the examples he talks about and how we can approach it and make it very trauma-informed for our survivors and make it really supportive. MI in general lends itself to building trust and rapport and relationship, and is very empowering to the client, which I think is a good fit a lot of times for our programs, because those are the values that our organizations have, is empowering our survivors and our clients to, do what they need to do for them. So the Connecting Paradigms book, it's a short book. It's a nice way to learn MI or learn about MI. If it's a book you want to get, I would totally recommend that. And then, of course, The Body Keeps the Score is the best trauma book out there. I have my clients read it all the time. I have my interns read it all the time. Any of that, and I teach at DU, so I have students read it all the time. So it's one of the best trauma books out there. If you're going to work in this profession and you want to know more about trauma and kind of understand it, it's a great book. So those are the books I recommend if you guys are interested in this stuff. But we'll dig into MI a little bit more. So motivational interviewing is not about directing. So a directing style is what the DAs do. It is what the cops do. It is what the doctors do, right? You come in, you tell them the problem, they tell you how to fix it, right? That's the direct communication. The opposite of that is following, which can kind of be talk therapy, or, sometimes as advocates, I think we just do that. We just let the clients talk and let them unload everything, and we validate them, and that's that. And that has its place for sure. But where MI falls is in this middle line of guiding. So it's more about, you're not the expert, you don't know everything, and you have some resources that you can offer and talk about ways to explore and come up with solutions for the problems. So when you're doing this MI journey with clients, it's more like you're a guide. If you go to a foreign country, it's nice to have a guide to tell you where to eat ice cream, or where, what's the best place to sleep, things like that. So MI is kind of, it's in this guiding. It's a dance. So ideally, you don't want it to be a wrestling match. You want it to be this dance where you're doing gently. Maybe you're leading a little bit. Sometimes you're not leading very hard or very quickly, but you stay with your client. But sometimes they're leading. And so it's ideally this really nice dance. I'm going to check the chat real fast and see if any questions have come up. Doesn't look like it. Okay, cool. So motivational interviewing is a collaborative communication style for strengthening a person's own motivation and commitment to change. Now, these are Miller and Rolnick's words themselves in the MI book. So I think sometimes it gets thought of, oh, it's a therapy. It's not. It's perfect for advocacy and case management and any of those other kind of roles. So I guess I just want to bring that up, is that it's less a therapy, but it's a communication style. So it's a way to sit with clients to help them on their road to change. So, change isn't like a fixed thing. It doesn't happen one time. It's a whole journey. And a lot of times our clients, your guys' clients, they have a lot of resistance to change, or they're really ambivalent about it. So we'll talk about ambivalence in a second, but the purpose of MI really is to create a non-judgmental, supportive environment for survivors as they move through the various stages of change, to guide them and explore them, and ultimately strengthening their motivation for health promoting change. So that's why I love MI work so much. That's why I've been using it for a really long time. When I first got trained in MI as an advocate, I remember going to the training and leaving and going, this is what we do as advocates already. It just puts a name and kind of a framework to it. But when you get really skilled at MI, you are really good at doing that guiding principle and helping people reach their goals. So benefits to our survivors is it helps clients take responsibility for themselves and their actions. It is future oriented. So it gets people thinking and envisioning a future that's free of their struggles. It helps with problem solving skills. Helps teach clients problem-solving skills. It prepares the clients to become more receptive to change. It builds the client's self-confidence and trust in themselves. It's client-centered and empowering. And I don't know about you guys, but I love all those things for myself and for clients. And benefits to those of us who practice motivational interviewing. So those of us who practice it. This is the benefit we get. And this is the other part that I love it, because when we work with trauma, we have to be mindful to take care of ourselves and the vicarious trauma and secondary trauma that we take on that can lead to burnout. So I love MI because it instills hope in us. And if we have hope, we can hold that hope for our clients. It is effective across languages and cultures. I speak Spanish and I teach MI in Spanish, and we do MI in Spanish in my clinic all day, every day. I'm in Denver, Colorado. I didn't mention that, but I work for a small medical clinic, and it's great in Spanish. I just recently attended an MI in Spanish. So we have some of those trainings in Spanish. Message me if you want those details. It's actually out of Albuquerque. Those MI trainings are out of Albuquerque. But it's effective in all languages, right? Like we're speaking the language of the client. So it helps create empathy in us and understanding with us. It leads to less frustration and burnout because we don't have expectations to be let down with clients. Like we readjust our expectations as the helper. Overall, it shows that folks follow through with their goals, and the emphasis on the provider, the emphasis is not on the provider for the intervention outcome, meaning it's not my responsibility if this client follows through with A, B, and C. And sometimes in some roles, I think we can feel that responsibility. So what I like about MI is that kind of takes it off of our shoulders. Yes, Daniela. I'll give you guys my email afterwards. You guys can message me. I'll tell you all about the información sobre español and MI en español. So. Okay, so the nice thing about MI and integrating it in a trauma-informed way is that we acknowledge that humans hurt humans and humans heal humans. And so this is like my personal motto because I'm very attachment-based in my approach therapeutically. And our clients come in and they've been hurt by other people, they've been hurt by other providers, they go to human services and, you know, the kind of the bigger systems that aren't set up to support our survivors. They come in with all this baggage to us, and we can be a healing tool for them. If you show up genuinely, authentically, in acceptance, then you can provide a healing environment for them. And that also helps heal their traumatized brain. So relationships can help heal and integrate some of the information. So that's what I love about MI. So quick overview about the spirit of MI for you guys. I'll kind of overview some of the main components of motivational interviewing. So forgive me if it's review for you, but I think it's important. So the spirit of MI is partnership, acceptance, compassion, evocation. And I love that because partnership is, we're doing it with the person. We're not doing it for them. We're doing it with them. We are alongside with them for this journey, right? And acceptance means that we accept their absolute worth. We are employing accurate empathy, we're giving them autonomy, and we're affirming their identities, their skills, their behaviors, things like that. Compassion, we're sitting with them, we're able to tolerate it and hold that space for them. Evocation, we're bringing out the curiosity for people. We're helping them be curious about their worlds, where, you know, they go to human services and, well, why did you let this happen? And why did this happen? No, when they come see us, we're not going to be like that. We're going to say, well, help me understand what's going on here. Man, that must have been hard. You were in an impossible situation and you made it out, right? This is why MI, I think, is really, really powerful in kind of all of that. So the reason MI was created was out of the substance use field, substance addictions field, realizing because the old school way of handling things was tough love. And, you know, boundaries, interventions, like that show Interventionist, where they hire somebody to give ultimatums, things like that. And Miller and Rolnick thought, well, that just doesn't seem to work for us. They were very humanistic in their approach to their therapeutic style. And they're like, I think we can do this a different way. So they created MI, you know, back in the 70s. They've studied it. Tons of studies have shown its effectiveness, not just in English, but in other languages, other countries. But it's created to get to this ambivalence piece. So in MI, you've probably heard of the stages of change, which I'm not going to go over, but more recently we focus on sustained talk versus change talk. Sustained talk is arguing to stay the same. Change talk is arguing for change in behavior. But the hardest thing is that ambivalence that's along the way. right? And the teetering back and forth. You see the tug of war here in this picture. So MI was created to also address some of the resistance that you naturally get when you're ambivalent. You're gonna argue and become defensive around things. And so MI was created to be able to, the phrase is roll with the resistance. We don't quite use that as much anymore, but to be able to sit in that resistance and just be curious with it and diffuse it kind of with compassion. So just talking about the change with somebody oftentimes leads to the change. And so that's the nice thing about MI and getting trained in it and really learning the skills is you learn how to help clients focus on change talk, not necessarily on arguments for not changing. And that's sometimes like you look at a garden and you can point out the flowers or you can point out the weeds, right? So like as somebody who is helping, I want to point out the flowers, which is the change talk. I want to talk about that. Even if there's only 2 flowers in that garden and the rest of it's weeds, if we talk more about the flowers, more flowers will grow, right? If we water the flowers, they grow. But if we talk about the weeds and stay in the weeds grow. So as a practitioner, you can guide more flowers growing, if that makes any sense. Oh, MI also loves its metaphors. So I'll throw that out there. So real quick, these are the phases of the MI. So the very bottom one is engagement. And we'll talk about ORs here in a little bit, which is open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries, which is what MI is most famous for. But you use ORs throughout all of this. And so the phases of MI are really important because a lot of times what happens is we meet with a client, we engage with them, and we jump right to the plan. And that's not helpful. Because if we haven't built that internal motivation for folks, we create this plan that they don't follow through on. And then they come back and they meet us the next time. Well, did you get that housing application in? Did you get that job application in? And they're like, no. Oh, well, what happened? I just didn't feel like it. Okay, we have to bump all the way back down to engagement. So the engagement piece is building relationship, understanding what's going on, getting a big picture for all the factors involved. Once you have that, then you can move it on to the focal point. And MI really wants the focal point to come from the client. The client gets to pick the focal point. And I know that's hard for some of you who do work in systems where you have to have objective goals, or right treatment plans or things like that. But you can do that in such a collaborative process that you're getting buy-in from the clients to go for their goals. And once you have a focal point, then you can evoke, you talk about all those flowers. What is their desire to change? What is their reason to change? What are the needs to change? Then you can really make this rich part of it and then move on to the plan and create that plan collaboratively. So I'm going to stop for a second. Does anybody have questions? Pop them in the chat. The chat's been really quiet. And I know this is a lot of information I'm throwing at you.
Darlene, while we're waiting for folks to see if they have any questions at this point, are you going to be able to share your slides after this? Is that something that you feel comfortable doing? Okay.
I can absolutely do that. Yeah.
That is usually a question that comes up. So
sure, I will absolutely share my slides. Could I give an example scenario of what? I guess I'm an example of what? Okay, so you're getting lost in the metaphors. So a DV example of the phases, is that what we're looking for? Or how the phases kind of work? Good questions. Okay, so these phases you're probably not going to do in one sitting unless you're with them for like 5 hours, maybe, but not likely. People aren't going to hold their attention spans for that long. Engagement, you're probably going to spend a session or two. And yeah, so Mary asked, how long do we let them just tell their story before doing MI? It's kind of up to you, what your agency decides, all of that. There is something called the MI sandwich, which looks like if you say you traditionally meet with somebody for an hour. So you do 20 minutes, you just let them open talk for 20 minutes, then you do 20 minutes of more structured MI, and then the last 20 minutes is the client talking again. So I know that's something that we did at case management at an agency I worked with that worked really well because it's the relationship building is them letting them share their story. But the guiding part is us really digging in there and finding out, what are the options? What are we looking at? Things like that. So a scenario of engagement. So say you meet with a client at the hospital and you just get their story and find out where they're at and what's going on. And, say they've got kids at home and their abuser was just arrested. And I'm just trying to come up with this on the fly. And let's see, they have to work the next day. They don't want to be in the hospital. And the cops are telling them they have to go to the DA's office the next day at 10 o'clock, but they work all day. And so you're getting all these pieces of information, but what you're looking for is like, what's important to the client? Is work important, right? We know that going to the DA's office or going to, follow up on investigation is important, but where is the client's value? If they're worried about how they're going to pay bills, they're likely going to do that. So if that becomes their focal point, you can talk about their plan, but there's probably not much ambivalence there. So you want to find like, what is the ambivalence? And the ambivalence might be, I don't know if I want to stay with this partner or not. Okay, yeah, can we talk about that a little bit more? Can we explore that, right? And we do that with some of the ORs and things like that. But you get into that ambivalence and then you start looking for, what is the change talk? And maybe the change talk is leaving. Maybe the change talk is creating a bigger safety plan. Maybe the change talk is, committing to going to couples therapy or family therapy or them going to therapy or whatever, what's going to help support them. So once you start hearing that, those little nuggets of like, well, I think I could maybe do this, or maybe it'd be good for me to start doing this. Oh, well, that's change. So you want to start talking about that. And you can find, so it's very abstract. I'm probably not going to do a good job like mapping this out, but you can find a focal point and then you just continue to evoke their desire, their ability, their reasons, and their need to change. And once all that's really strong, they'll be ready to start making a plan. So let me look back through the chat. It is similar to solution focused, though I will say MI is much more trauma informed just in general, and it's not as directive. So solution focus is pretty directive. You stay on it in the present, like you keep present stuff, but MI doesn't say you have to be that stringent about staying on the future goal, because solution focus can give them the idea for the goals. But what I find is when survivors are in an ambivalent way, if you ask them the miracle question, which is, if you woke up tomorrow, what would be better? They're going to say, I don't know. So that's where solution focus jumps to the plan too soon. So MI gives us the tools to like back it up and help create the plan together collaboratively. You find, yeah, so Mary says they find it helpful to ask what their threshold is. For sure. So the skills that we use in MI, and keep asking questions in the chat for sure. The skills we use in MI are the ORs, open-ended questions, and invitations. So I don't know if you've heard that, but I'll talk about it in just a little bit. Affirmations, right, where we're affirming the client's inner strengths. And it's not just, wow, you're such a strong person. It's more than that. It's, wow, it's really important for you to be a mother who's present there for your kids. It's important for you to take care of your dogs when you get home, right? We're looking to look at what's important to the client and reflect back how their behavior is reflecting what's important to them. Like, what does the client value and how are they living in accordance to their values? What I love about MI is that, folks don't change unless they're uncomfortable. And in the helping profession, I think a lot of times we want to take the pain away from people. Of course, it's uncomfortable to sit in it, but nobody makes change unless they're really uncomfortable. And so, a lot of what we do with MI is just sit with people in their discomfort. Like, yeah, that really sucks that it doesn't feel like you can do A, B, and C right now. Yeah, and just validate that. So the reflections, come with the validations and, all of that stuff. And then summaries we use to help reflect back to the client what we heard them say, make sure that they can tell us that we're on the right track, that we're understanding them. That's really, the affirmations, reflections, and summaries really help the client know that we're understanding where they're coming from and we get their situation and that we're not being judgmental around that. So, yeah. So the other thing I do like about MI is some people think you can't give advice with MI. You absolutely can, but you just have to ask for permission. So an example could be, I have some information on that. Would you mind if I shared it with you? Another example could be, other clients have told me that A, B, and C works. Is this something you'd like to hear about? Give them the option to say yes or no. And if they say no, then you don't have to proceed forward. Maybe you can just check mark it for next time and say, okay, well, it might be something helpful. I'll ask them about later. But we always, if we're giving information or advice, we always want to ask permission to do it. Do you want to hear this resource? So you mentioned not having food at home. I have, the application for food assistance. Is that something you're interested in? Give them like the say to say, yes, I do want to do this, or no, I don't. So trauma informed, and this kind of goes into just the book in general, but I love how they blend together, and it just talks about creating a safe, calm, predictable environment, right? Having policies that are trauma informed, like kind of all this stuff, having boundaries, slowing down, right? The trauma informed book really kind of talks about window of tolerance. So when people go outside their window of tolerance, meaning maybe they get flooded with stuff, or maybe they dissociate or they check out from things. The nice thing is that MI can, in a way, bring them back, or you just, there are other kind of skills and techniques that you can do to help folks kind of regulate through things. And the book also explains kind of how memory works with trauma. And I'm sure you guys have all had training in this because of the field that you're in. And we know survivors' memory is not intact in the linear, contextual way that people would expect it to be. We know that that's not what happens with trauma. So what I love about the Shifting Paradigms book is they talk a lot about trauma, like the neurobiology of trauma. So I also love it because it can go hand in hand with harm reduction strategies, right? All the safety planning that we do is harm reduction strategies. So, clients can access services when they're struggling with consequences or coping with adverse life situations. But we can also make a shift to help the client goals. Like, it seems we've identified these possible goals. I wonder if it'd be okay to explore this one further, right? Or if there's one that is more imminent than the others, I would be, you can always give it back to them. I'm wondering if we could explore this a little further. So,
Darlene, we have one question in the chat.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah. So it says, this is trauma-informed focus. Is this also a type of healing-centered approach to an intake or interview?
I would absolutely say yes. So, including the ORs into intakes and interviews is a beautiful way to create more healing and let the patient, the clients know, sorry, I work in a medical clinic, we call them patients now, to let the clients know that you're on the same page with them. So yes, you can MI interviews, even if you have to ask a bunch of questions. But the nice thing is infusing those affirmations and the reflections are really powerful ways to help promote healing. So I love that question. I won't go into the ethics of MI too much, but they're all about giving the client autonomy, non-malice, beneficence, and justice. So do no harm and do what's best for everybody kind of involved. So I won't go into that, but it's all about it's not at all about authority or coercive power. So another concept of MI that I love is elicit, provide, elicit, and this is great. Again, so yes, get the client's permission about something or check in. So I know we talked about you applying for food stamps last week. Tell me what you remember about that conversation. So you're eliciting the information back to them so you understand what they understand. Then you provide, which is addressing any misinformation or providing additional resources. And then once you've done that, you say, okay, so now that we've talked about this again, would you tell me what you understood about what we just talked about? So you're checking back in again to see what they understand, right? Our survivors' memories are shot almost all the time. So you can check in to say, okay, so, last time we met, our goals were A, B, and C. What did you understand about your goals? What did you accomplish? If they didn't, then you can check in on that. But this is one of the tactics that you can use from MI. So lots of different ways you can ask this. You can just say, may I tell you about this? What do you know about such and such? What would you like to do about blah, blah, blah? Would you be interested in some information about Trying to think of, would you be interested in some information about going to our safe house? Things like that. Would you like to know about some therapists in our area that work with survivors of DV? Things like that. But you want to make sure that you're supporting their autonomy and you're not prescribing anything. You're not using any jargon, right? Try not to use acronyms and things like that with survivors, because a lot of times they don't understand the acronyms that we use in our field. So some things to just be kind of mindful of. So I'm not going to go into it too much, but darn cat is when we really see somebody preparing for change. You're going to see them have expressed the desire. I want to, I'd like to, I wish, I hope. They're going to have ability. I can, or I'm able to. They're going to have reasons. I would probably, it might affect. I want to do this for A, B, and C. And they're going to express needs. So I need to, I have to, I must, I can't keep going like this. Those are all examples of change talk. And when we hear that in MI, we want to latch onto that and really evoke and explore and bring curiosity and awareness to all of that. So that's where I think MI is really strong, is when we hear this change talk, that's what we really want to go to. We can explore all the reasons that you stay in the situation, but that doesn't help you move out of the situation. Let's talk about all this other stuff. And like, if somebody has a strong desire, but then doesn't have the confidence, great, then we can really work on the confidence piece of things. So to say that one must, can, wants to, or has good reasons to change is not to say that one will. So the last part of it, before you get to the planning stage, is you want to get a commitment from the client. You're going to get activation statements, meaning I'm willing to, I'm ready to, I'm prepared to. And then you're going to go to the planning, which is taking steps. So it really is so far along the line of working with somebody to get to that point. Now, it works a little different when you want to do safety planning. So I understand that. But from like a trauma-informed MI perspective, these are some great ways to ask questions in like a safety planning lens. So what situations or actions put you in danger? What are the warning signs that make you feel unsafe? What coping skills can you use to self-manage those situations? What other people can be contacted to help? What are the resources available to you? What can you do to improve your safety, or just improve safety for your family or your dogs or whatever? What would give you a greater sense of safety in your life right now? And what gave you a sense of safety before blank happened? So these are nice open-ended questions, right? Going back to the open-ended questions. These are great ways to do safety planning. So ask an open-ended question, let them answer, and then give them an affirmation. And then ask another question, let them answer, validate their experience, or give them an affirmation, right? Reflect back to them what they're saying, or their concerns, or their inner wisdom, right? So that's why I say I think MI can really lend a lot into all the types of work that we do with clients. So we're going to wind down, and I'm just going to open it up for kind of conversation, but there is such thing as post-traumatic growth and resiliency, and this is something that you all are part of. It's synergetic. You are a part of it. So you're helping with the collaboration and tenacity and health and reasoning, composure and vision, all of these domains that help people be resilient. So I want to thank each and every one of you, and I am happy to open up the floor just for questions.
I was muted, sorry. Thank you so much, Darlene, and I really appreciate you sharing all that information with us. I'm sure folks will be able to like kind of take their time and digest some of the questions, examples that they can use. But what questions do you all have for Darlene in terms of maybe implementing or trying to figure out like the parallels and the intersection with DV?
And maybe we'll say, while people are thinking of questions, motivational interviewing training can look a lot of different ways. It can be a 3-hour training. It could be an 8-hour training. It could be a 3-day training. The way that Miller and Rolnick trained us. So I'm a national motivational interviewing, like train the trainer. And it's very interactive. And so it's just a lot of role playing. It's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of coaching and listening in like a really supportive manner. So a good MI training is probably going to teach you a skill and then have you practice it and then teach it and then practice. So like there is no set, like you have to do an MI training in 2 days or whatever, but it's all about skill level and where you're at and what you need. So could I elaborate a bit more on post-traumatic growth and resiliency and how as an advocate we can incorporate that a bit more into our work? Yeah, so I think we have a really great way being advocates to see that resiliency in our clients when they don't see it in themselves, right? And a really powerful healing tool is holding that hope for our clients. Like sometimes I will tell like my clients, like, I know you don't have any hope. I'm going to hold the hope for you because I know we're going to get through this together. And using that like we language is really helpful for our survivors. Like I'm on your team. Also being very trauma informed, like you have a whole team, like our whole agency is your team, right? Like when you meet with survivors, I don't know how many of you are in offices anymore, but if you can introduce them to as many of the workers as you can, say, okay, well, this is, this is so-and-so, and this is so-and-so, and this is so-and-so. So they feel like they have that team behind them. But going back to the question, just promoting resiliency, it's helping clients be healthier in themselves, right? And just being a supportive ear. There's nothing you can like necessarily, there are no stages to do it, but I mean, doing the work that you guys do is already helping them promote resiliency. That probably didn't answer your question very much, but that's a very big question. Maybe somebody will write a book about it someday. Okay. Can you talk about how you might use MI when a client is contemplating a decision that might impact their safety? Yeah. And what happens if it's something that you wouldn't have them do, right? If your values mismatch with their values, right? That can get tricky, having to put our stuff aside. But in a realistic way, like with MI, if, yeah, I mean, say that the simple truth of it is, this person is threatened to kill them and they're going to move back in with them and their children. And you have to be really realistic about safety planning with that and say, like, again, you want to give the wisdom back to the client, but you don't also have to step out of the way and say, oh yeah, sure, just go do that. But you can use, and in the earlier stages, like the engagement of MI, we really try to build discrepancy, right? So you're telling me this one thing, and you're telling me this thing, but they actually don't match up. Well, help me understand that, right? So we use these things called double-sided reflections. So on one hand, this, and on one hand, this. And you kind of give it back to the client because that helps them see how they're not looking at the two things together and it's not logical. So you help build the discrepancy between the two. And that's one way that you can kind of help survivors using MI, if that makes any sense. I would definitely use those double-sided reflections. So you say you're going to be safe, and the last 3 times you've done this has been the outcome. Help me understand that, right? You're giving it back to them and having them look at them both together. It doesn't make sense to even them. So that'll help them work through it. Let's see. Oh, just some comments. Yeah, hope is powerful, you guys. Hope is so powerful. What other questions? Let's see. Could you talk more about cultural sensitivity and awareness with this approach? What considerations have you noticed to be mindful of? So let me take a moment to think on that. I haven't had to be mindful of a lot because I find that this approach is very non-confrontational, right? And confrontation usually dictates defensiveness. And so this helps diffuse the defenses, really. When you validate somebody right away, that is the best de-escalation technique you have right there. Telling them that what's going on for them is real and you believe them, de-escalates it right there. So I think just by nature of trying to understand where they're coming from, it doesn't mean you have to agree with it, right? It doesn't mean it has to make sense. Like if there's discrepancy there, then it doesn't have to, but it does mean that you can be very humble. I think MI lends very nicely to cultural humility because you aren't acting like the expert. The client is the expert in their own world, in their own culture, with their own identities that show up with the issues that are going on with them, with identities of their communities and the way the community views things. And so I find that it's really easy to use MI from a very culturally humble place, if that makes sense. So yeah, great questions, you guys. Lay them on me. And I am not an expert in MI either. So I should have said that at the beginning. I love MI and I love teaching MI, but I am by no means like some grand expert in this. What would be an effective MI response to what would you do if you were in my situation? Oh my gosh, Laura, how many times do you guys hear that? Well, what would you do? What would you do if you were in my situation, right? Can anybody maybe type in the chat? I'm going to challenge you guys. What would you guys say? Anybody have ideas? So what would you do if you were in my situation, right? I would probably validate. I'd have a tendency to reflect. Your situation is so different than anything I've ever been in. Like, it's okay to name that. Or even if you've been in something similar, you can name, you know, my situation was really different than yours. And so I don't know what I would do in your situation. It's pretty confusing, isn't it? Right? Maybe they're looking for guidance. So you could reflect that back and say, you know, it seems like it would make sense to get some guidance here with that. And it doesn't mean you can't provide guidance. It's just, we want to balance telling the client what to do versus just absolutely listening to them. So does that answer your question? If it doesn't, pop up another one in the chat. Let's see some stuff about the audio transcript. Do you think it's possible to use MI with individuals mandated to treatment? That's when MI is used most, in all honesty. MI is used a lot in the court system, in the jail system. It probably should be used way more than it actually is, but it's used a lot for court mandated stuff because, again, you're building relationship, and the big piece of it is you're developing that discrepancy. Well, yeah, you say you didn't A, B, and C, and A, B, and C are these consequences. Help me understand how that happened, right? Things like that. The nice thing is too, is MI can really diffuse, like I said, it can diffuse the defensiveness. And folks who are court mandated already walk in with that wall up of defenses. So for you validating and saying, yeah, this is pretty crummy, that you have to come talk to me. What can we do to make the best of this time we have together, right? I would say I appreciate you asking me this question. Okay, so Mary, I appreciate you the response to what would you do in this situation. Mary said, I appreciate you asking me this question and I understand why you would. Tell me what you think you should do, right? Putting it back onto their plate. Validating, naming, acknowledging the feelings of uncertainty. Beautiful. Got some great MI folks in here. I can't be in your shoes. I can talk with you about how some of the clients have addressed concerns similar to yours, right? That's beautiful. Yeah. Cool. What else, you guys? This is a lot of information. I realize when you learn MI and you learn all their concepts and everything, you know, it's all very cognitive. But when you practice it, and with more practice, it starts to become more a part of like your being. Like I said, it's a communication style. So yes, I use it therapeutically, but it's a communication style to get folks curious about what's going on for them and what they think is best. It's about aligning with the client's values, not what my value set is. That's why I think it's really culturally humble. It's about what's important to you, like truly deep down important. Yeah.
While we're waiting for folks to see if they have any more questions, I'm going to go ahead and pop up the last poll. So this is kind of the overall poll, but want you all to know that we still have the space and time. So think of questions, pop them in the chat, and we'll get to those. And here is, so this is an anonymous poll specific to just the overall presentation. So that should be up. And there's 3 questions on this one. The other thing to know is that we also have the option for you all to give us narrative feedback, and that can also be anonymous if you would like. Oh, thanks for putting your email address in the chat, Darlene. I'm going to go ahead and I'm pasting this in the chat, but this is the link, and we'll send this out afterwards with the slides and the recording link. But just in case you all want to have a question fresh on your brain or feedback fresh on your brain, that is where you can give some anonymous narrative feedback. If you want to include your email, you absolutely can. Okay, we'll give it just a few more seconds.
Yeah, feel free to email me if you have questions. If you want to know about those MI trainings in Spanish, let me know. There's a super strong Mexico group of MI folks. So they're thinking about doing more MI trainings, even from like Mexico and stuff. So it's pretty cool. Got cool stuff. I mean, there's trainers all over the world. The training I did a couple months ago, we had people from 16 different countries. So all of the languages, Australia, Japan, I mean, Korea, everything. So it's pretty cool.
And it looks like folks are putting their emails in the chat, and Darlene, I'll make sure you get those. Okay. So that way the folks want that ongoing training information. It's a great resource. And I'll also make sure we send out Darlene's email with we'll send out this chat, but we'll make sure we put Darlene's email in the body of the email so that you all have that. Any other questions? And I'm assuming that if folks have questions down the road, would you be amenable to those, Darlene?
Yeah, absolutely. Just shoot me an email. I'm totally open to it.
Awesome. So looks like a lot of folks are interested. Wonderful. Thank you. And again, thank you, Darlene, for being able to share this with us. I know it's a lot of information, but like you said, it sounds like we're already, advocates are already doing this stuff. It's how do you frame it? How do you maybe enhance it or keep it flowing. So thank you for being here.
No problem. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for the work that you do. You have such a profound impact on people's lives. And even if you spend 5 minutes with somebody on a phone call or just face to face, you make such a difference in people's lives. So thank you guys.
All right. So I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. Lots of thank yous coming through. Thank you again, Darlene. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap up for today. So thank you all for being here. Next month for our Facts and Snacks, which will be March 8th, keep an eye out for the email alert. It will be about ERPO. We're talking about protection orders related to firearms, but we have some folks from Colorado Ceasefire who are going to share kind of how has ERPO been working with the law change. So that's next month. So we'll keep an eye out for that. And again, thank you all for being here and really appreciate you all too.